The stars have always been a cruel mirror. They reflect not the promise of hope, but the certainty of endings. And for the Eldar, that reflection has long since hardened into prophecy. Their laughter once carried across the void, a symphony of arrogance and artistry, but it has curdled into a dirge that few still dare to hear. Across the fractured remnants of their empire, the craft worlds drift like mausoleums lit from within, each one carrying the memory of a civilization that once rivaled gods and now flees from its own shadow. Every rune carved into wraithbone, every soulstone clasped to a breast, every whispered prayer to a silent pantheon is a reminder that the fate of the Eldar is not simply death, but the slow, inescapable consumption of everything they are. The doom that chases them is not distant. It sits at the edge of every thought, a reflection in every mirror, and a whisper in every dream. If you feel the weight of this tragedy and wish to journey deeper into the heart of it, then lend your voice to this chorus of remembrance. Subscribe, share, and remain with us in this unfolding story of the Eldar's fall. The galaxy is vast and merciless, but together as listeners and witnesses, we keep the fire of memory alive even against the night. The tale you will hear is not of victories, but of inevitabilities. It is a story carved into wraithbone, painted across shattered domes, and written in the blood of those who have struggled against a doom that was birthed by their own brilliance. This is the inescapable doom of the Eldar in Warhammer 40K. The galaxy remembers through echoes, and the echoes of the Eldar's empire still shiver across the void. To stand beneath their works, in those lost days before the fall, was to feel the weight of artistry so refined it eclipsed reason itself. Towers of wraithbone stretched not as the crude stone of human cities, nor the metal carcasses of orc fortresses, but as living veins of light, pulsing with psychic resonance. Every archway curved like the flow of water, every chamber hummed with a song that no human ear could bear for long. The Eldar did not build as mortals build. They coaxed their homes from the fabric of the Imperium, shaping living structures that breathed and dreamed with them, reflections of their own boundless psyche. Their fleets too bore this symphony of arrogance and beauty, where human void ships groaned with iron hulls and rattled with the ceaseless coughing of their machine spirits. The starships of the Eldar were gliding cathedrals. Their sails shimmered like the wings of phantom creatures, translucent yet indomitable, catching tides of energy invisible to human eyes. To witness such vessels at the height of the Empire was to mistake them for living beings, leviathans born of dream and flame. It was said that when an Eldar fleet entered a system, the very light bent differently, as if the void itself bent in reverence. Yet beneath all this grandeur coiled the serpent of indulgence. For the Eldar, mastery of matter and spirit had come too easily. And when there are no more limits, desire becomes its own god. In those days before she who thirsts clawed her way into being, the Eldar gave themselves to excess so total it hollowed their triumphs from within. Whole worlds pulsed not with labor or war, but with ceaseless revels, their skies lit by lights that never dimmed, their streets echoing with cries of ecstasy and despair in equal measure. Their artistry, once a testament to creation, turned toward sensation, each sculpture, each song, each act driven not by meaning but by the pursuit of ever greater intensity. The gods of the Eldar watched this with unease, though even they could not stem the tide. Isha, gentle mother of fertility, whispered warnings that went unheard. Kernus the hunter watched his children chase their own hungers instead of prey, and Kala Menshikani, the bloody-handed god of war, saw his altars darken as his people drifted from the discipline of conflict into the formlessness of indulgence. But pride is a deafening song, and the Eldar were deaf to all but their own brilliance. Even the pantheon would one day splinter under the weight of their creations. It is tempting, when gazing backward, to imagine this empire as a golden age, a paradise lost unjustly. Yet paradise is a lie, and for the Eldar, the lie was one they told themselves until it became indistinguishable from truth. They truly believed that they had risen above consequence. Death was not feared, for the soul stones offered sanctuary. Labor was not endured, for psychic craft made toil unnecessary. War was not feared, for their martial skill was unmatched. What civilization could rival them? The humans still huddled in caves when Eldar ships already danced between stars. The orcs, brutish savages driven only by instinct. The Necrons, their ancient foes, still entombed in their stasis tombs. To the Eldar, the galaxy was theirs by right. Theirs to shape, theirs to indulge in without restraint. And so they indulged. Their cities became theaters of sensation. Their temples became halls of intoxication. Their philosophers ceased to debate virtue and instead sculpted dreams into reality for no reason but to taste them. Pleasure cults bloomed like fungi across their worlds, drawing millions into endless carnivals of flesh and spirit. What restraint once bound them had long since been discarded. The craft worlds, those immense arcs that now drift as bastions of survival when were at first ridiculed as sanctuaries of cowards, places for the timid who fled the true heart of Eldar glory. Those who withdrew to the craft worlds were scorned, cast as ascetics refusing to drink from the overflowing chalice. Few understood then that those derided cowards would one day carry the last ember of their race. There are stories whispered now across the skeins of the galaxy of what it felt like in those last years. Before the fall, to walk through an Eldar pleasure city was to be swallowed by a tide of sensation that stripped away identity. Some speak of chambers where sound itself became liquid, filling lungs until the listener drowned in song. Others tell of feasts where each taste was so overwhelming it burned away memory, leaving the eater lost, weeping with joy and confusion. Entire continents became stages for games where lives were wagered, discarded and remade, and none cared so long as the hunger was fed. These were not simple entertainments. They were rituals of excess that warped the very fabric of the Imperium. And that, though few recognized it at first, was the true danger. For every act of unrestrained desire, every scream of ecstasy or despair, every psychic surge born of indulgence, rippled into the warp. The Imperium is not passive. It feeds on thought, on emotion, on the fire of sentience. The Eldar, in their brilliance and arrogance, fed it a banquet of corruption. And from that feast something stirred, something vast, patient, and hungry, something that waited until the song of their decadence reached its crescendo before opening its eyes. I was not born when the last festivals burned, but I have walked the echo of them. On Ulthway we learn early how to listen through wraithbone, to press our thoughts against the cool grain of living halls and let the past breathe into us. The Infinity Circuit is not only a sanctuary, it is a memory that thinks back. When I was still an apprentice at the feet of Spirit Seer Medriel, she set a waystone upon my brow and told me to descend, not with feet but with questions. I remember the sensation even now, a pressure like deep water, then a flowering of light as 100,000 voices unfolded in careful, sorrowful harmony. They did not speak in words. They unspooled impressions, scents, fragments of touch, silk caught on a fingertip, a passage of choral song so pure it left a bruise, the taste of wine that should have been sweet but carried a metallic afterglow, as if the cup had remembered blood. This was how I first saw the empire that died. Through the gentle cruelty of perfect recall, one memory rises always above the rest, a dome of glass older than any human nation, roofed in petals of light that shifted with the moods of the congregation beneath. It was a place of art before it became a crucible of appetite. The Eldar gathered there to sculpt dreams into shape, each artisan guiding crystal, scent, and sound through the soft movements of their hands, their minds shaping the medium more powerfully than any tool. At first it was holy, or as near to holy as our people then still understood. But with each generation that returned to that dome, if the word generation even means anything for a species that could stretch lifetimes like ribbon, the art bent toward stranger long since gone to rest inside the circuit. The moment admiration turned to worship and then to hunger, beauty was no longer enough. They wanted to be consumed. Ulthway had already turned away by then. Our seer council had red strands that tasted of iron and ash, and the craft world's long engines were singing to be loosed. Those who boarded her were mocked from afar, though the mockery came gilded in poetry and laughter. Cowards, prudes, melancholics, they called us, as if sorrow were a deformity. We endured the names. Our caravans took on supplies and reliquaries, children and seed vaults, shrines and archives, and behind the bustle, there was a quiet that I can still hear in the bones of the ship. When I listen the right way, the quiet of a decision made too late to be anything but necessary. What strikes me most when the circuit lets me into those days is not the obscenity of the revels, though there was obscenity, enough to stain the warp itself, but the gentleness of ordinary moments, collapsing under the weight of what thrummed at the edges, a teacher guiding a student's hand over a lattice of light, a hunter releasing an arrow in a practice glade that no longer knew hunger or fear, a parent fastening a waystone at a child's throat and smiling without, knowing why the smile would not hold. Doom is rarely a single sound. It is a pressure that warps every note until the song cannot be sung. There were voices that tried to save us from ourselves. I have touched the imprint of a priestess, of Isha, who stood in a hall that smelled of rain and sliced her palm upon a knife of clear crystal to remind her congregation that blood still mattered. I have felt the pride of a war host captain who kept sharpening his glaive long after there was no enemy left to cut. Because discipline was a thread he refused to let snap. And I have tasted, bitter as burnt resin, the apology of a poet who set fire to her own work when she realized the audience had come to be dissolved, not moved. Each of them felt the same paradox. The more they resisted, the more the current proved itself. They could stand in the river and scream the word no until their throats failed. But the water was already high and the banks were already broken. I am told by human scholars that our downfall seems obvious to them in retrospect. Excess births monsters, they say, as if saying it marks them wise. They do not understand what it means to feel the warp answer, to sense the Imperium, lean close and listen, like a beast learning the sound of its name. The Imperium is not a mirror. It is a mouth. When an entire species feeds that mouth with a chorus of craving, the mouth grows teeth. The first time I felt the faintest graze of that hunger in the circuit, I tore the waystone from my brow and retched into my hands. The taste was ash and rose syrup. The taste was a promise that no promise would ever be kept again. Even so, there were passages of grace. Not all our worlds were devoured by carnival. Far from the central spires of decadence, there were sanctuaries of craft and learning where the old disciplines held. Bone singers composed gardens that healed grief. Rangers kept to their paths and brought back the news with a soldier's economy. The witch seers charted storms on the way, outer skeins, and whispered of a pressure building. But they whispered into winds that smelled of incense and laughter, and their warnings drifted like smoke. I think of those places often, how they bloomed like pale flowers in winter and how carefully the frost gathered on their edges. There was a night, if the word night means anything in a city, where light obeyed the mood of its owners. When the dome of petals flickered, in the memory it is only a shiver, a momentary misstep in the perfection of illumination, a hush so slight the audience transmuted it into delight. It is always that way. The first hairline crack in glass that still holds. A performer faltered and turned the falter into a flourish. The crowd applauded. The dome kept breathing light. But a seam had opened between sensation and silence, and something cold explored the seam with a patient tongue. I do not know the name of the artisan who looked up and felt, not thought, not deduced, but felt, that the light was looking back. All I have is the echo of their breath catching, the pressure of their fingernails against their palm, the humility of their prayer to gods who were already beginning to bend. When I surfaced from the circuit that day, Madriel set a cup of water in my hands and told me it was time to learn how to hold fear without letting it breed. We practiced the path then, the paths that would become our salvation and our chain both, though in those first lessons they felt like shapes traced in dust. Dedication, discipline, denial. To a young mind, denial is a wound that keeps bleeding. Only later did I understand that it can also be a bandage. We refined the ritual of fastening our waystones. We tightened the liturgies around the handling of our dead. We learned to walk our halls with the restraint of a blade held in a sheath. The ship hummed underfoot like a sleeping behemoth. Outside, the void glittered with distances that once had felt friendly, and now felt obscene.